I'm Laurel, 34, female, and I co-founded a boutique marketing firm with two friends about 6 years ago. We work with high-end brands, mostly luxury hospitality, fashion, and wellness. I think designer hotel chains, niche skincare lines, or European luggage startups that want to break into the North American market. Our work is intense, creative, and fast-paced. We're not just making pretty ads for Instagram. We build full campaigns, manage digital strategy, oversee influencer partnerships, and sometimes even fit in on product development meetings. None of that has ever mattered to my older sister Nadine. She's 36, a pediatric surgeon, and she's always made it clear that her job is the only one in the family that counts for over a decade. At every family dinner or holiday gathering, she'd toss out comments like clockwork. When Laurel gets tired of playing entrepreneur, maybe she'll get a real job. Or, how many TikToks did you make this week? It was like a running joke, but not funny. Our parents never addressed it directly. They just glance at each other, smile awkwardly, and try to steer the conversation somewhere else. I'd usually just let it roll off, maybe throw back a sarcastic line if I was in the mood. But the truth is, those comments always hit harder than I let on, especially after weeks where I barely had time to sleep. It didn't matter how many contracts I closed or how much revenue we brought in. To Nadine, I was still just running some Instagram ad hobby. Her husband, Miles, is a different story. He's 38, has an MBA, and he spent the past few years bouncing between startups and freelance consulting gigs. Mostly remote work, mostly finance adjacent. He's smart, measured, and surprisingly good at reading the room. Unlike Nadine, he never made digs about my job. If anything, we had a sort of polite distance. At family events, we'd chat briefly, usually about work. He always seemed to understand what I was building. Even if we came from different industries. Things shifted about 2 months ago. We were at our parents' house for dinner. Just the 5 of us, me, Nadine, Miles, and our mom and dad. I mentioned, in passing, that my team had just wrapped a campaign for a luxury Swiss watch brand, and that we were flying to Copenhagen for a client shoot. Nadine didn't miss a beat. "Oh, so you're still peddling influencer watches?" She smiled like she'd said something witty, then kept eating. I didn't respond. No sarcastic comeback, no forced laugh. I just nodded. That moment stuck with me. Not because it hurt, I think I'd reached the point where it didn't anymore, but because it was the last time I gave her opinion any weight. A week later, our firm landed 2 major contracts back-to-back, one in luxury travel, another with a European skincare line. We were stretched thin and needed a strategy consultant, someone who could work closely with the creative team and help shape client pitches with a sharper edge. I kept thinking about something Miles had once said, probably a year earlier, during a casual conversation at a barbecue. He mentioned he was bored working with financial clients and would love to be part of a creative team just once. Back then, I didn't think much of it. But now, it made sense. I didn't bring it up to Nadine. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't even ask around informally. I just messaged Miles the next morning and asked if he'd be open to taking on part-time strategy work with a boutique marketing firm. He said yes. We met for coffee the next day, went over the scope, and by the end of the meeting, I offered him a 6-month freelance contract. He accepted on the spot. We onboarded him quietly, under an internal project alias. It wasn't about hiding, at least not at first. I just didn't want family drama bleeding into my work life. Miles jumped in like he'd been with us from the start. By the end of his 2nd week, he'd already helped tighten 2 pitch decks and suggested a campaign angle that ended up landing us the skincare account. We're 5 weeks in now, and it's like he's been part of the team for years. He works remotely, joins virtual sessions, and sends voice memos with feedback that always hit the mark. My creative director told me last week I didn't realize how badly we needed someone like him until he showed up. As far as Nadine knows, her husband is between contracts and taking a short break to recharge. She hasn't mentioned anything else, and Miles hasn't let anything slip. He's been professional, respectful, and surprisingly invested. What makes it surreal is how normal it feels. No drama, no tension, just work. And yet, every time I see Nadine post some passive-aggressive quote about women faking success with followers and filters, I can't help but think, your husband is thriving in the exact space you've mocked for over a decade. She has no idea, and I don't know how long that will last. But for now, this is where we are. By the end of week 5, Miles had completely integrated into our workflow. He picked up our systems faster than most full-time hires, joined creative meetings with sharp, clear feedback, and brought in a fresh angle that helped us lock down a skincare brand out of Amsterdam. During the pitch, he suggested restructuring our value proposition to align with sustainability metrics. And that was exactly what won the client over. The founder emailed me afterwards saying it was the most targeted strategy she'd ever seen. The team caught on fast. My co-founder Adrian pulled me aside after one of the pitch sessions and asked where I found him. I just said a friend of a friend recommended him, which wasn't a lie. We kept things moving through our usual freelancer platform, so everything looked clean on paper. There were no mentions of me in his contract files or payment statements unless someone dug through internal Slack history, which nobody had a reason to. A couple of weeks ago, my parents hosted a barbecue. Just close family, me, Nadine, Miles, and our parents. First time I'd seen Nadine and Miles in the same place since he started working with us. I didn't think it would be an issue at first, but as soon as we were all in the same yard, I realized how thin the line was. Miles played it cool. When my dad asked how work was going, he said he was between contracts, helping a friend with some proposals here and there. Nadine didn't question it, just raised an eyebrow and moved on. Later in the afternoon, I mentioned my upcoming trip to Copenhagen. Our firm is doing a brand shoot for the new client. Nadine didn't miss a beat. She laughed and said something about how exhausting it must be to babysit influencers across Europe. Miles was sitting nearby with a drink, and when I glanced over, he looked at me for just a second too long. Guilt flashed across his face, quick but obvious. Then he changed the topic to something about flight delays in Europe, and everyone shifted with him like nothing happened. A week after that, I got a text from Nadine, totally out of the blue. She said she'd been thinking, and if my firm ever needed someone like Miles, she'd be happy to refer him. Said he was starting to get bored. I stared at the message for a while before replying with, "I'll keep that in mind." That was it. No emoji, no follow-up. I didn't bring it up to Miles. A few days later, we had a strategy session scheduled, just the two of us. We were mapping out a campaign roadmap, and in the middle of it, he brought up the dynamic between Nadine and me. He said it flat out, she's always had this strange bitterness toward me, and he never understood why. I kept things neutral and asked if he felt weird about working with me now that she might be suspicious. He didn't hesitate. Said she might be his wife, but that didn't mean she understood everything about how professional respect worked. He said I treated him like a real partner, and that was more than she had in years. That same week, we hosted a team dinner downtown to celebrate the skincare campaign, going live. Small rooftop spot, casual vibe, just good food and wine. Miles came along. It was the first time he'd met some of our remote staff in person. Everyone loved him. At one point, someone asked how long he'd known me, and we both answered at the same time, different versions, but close enough to sound natural. Nothing raised eyebrows. But the whole evening had this strange undercurrent, not romantic, just quiet tension. I caught myself watching him laugh with our graphic designer, helping one of our interns order food, and I realized just how quickly he'd become part of this team. It was like he belonged here all along. And it felt weird knowing he'd go home to Nadine, who still rolled her eyes every time my name came up. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I got a text from him. Just one line. "Thank you. This feels like what I should have been doing all along." I didn't reply right away. The next few days at the office moved fast. We onboarded another client and had our first internal briefing with them. Miles was part of it. He brought in a brand alignment chart before I'd even mentioned it, and our new client asked if he could lead the strategy calls moving forward. And just like that, Nadine's husband was running point on one of our biggest accounts, and she still had no idea. The part that caught me off guard wasn't the secrecy, it was how right it all felt. He wasn't just surviving in our space, he was thriving. He belonged. And somehow, the person who used to tear down my career at every family event had unknowingly pushed her own husband right into the center of it. None of this was planned. I didn't go into this to prove anything or get back at her. But watching it unfold day by day, it's hard not to notice the shift. She keeps mocking, rolling her eyes, pretending none of this matters. But meanwhile, the person closest to her has quietly chosen to step into my world, and he's not looking back. Things at work picked up fast. We were prepping for a strategy showcase for a regional award event, and the shortlist came out that Monday. Our firm had been nominated in the Innovation and Digital Branding category. It was a big deal for us, especially since the campaign we submitted had Miles as lead strategist. He had taken full charge of the metrics alignment and campaign architecture, and the nomination email even mentioned how cohesive the creative strategy execution was. Internally, we all knew that was about him. But around the same time, little cracks started showing. During one of our check-ins, Miles mentioned that things were tense at home. He didn't say much, just that the energy had shifted and that small conversations kept turning into arguments. A few days later, one of my project managers passed him in the hallway while he was on the phone. She heard him say something along the lines of, "You don't have to understand it, Nadine. Just respect it." Sal, the way she repeated it to me later made it sound like that wasn't the first time they'd had that argument. The real issue started with Instagram. We posted a short behind-the-scenes reel from our campaign shoot. It showed snippets of the planning team, the location scout, and a shot of the whiteboard Miles had set up during strategy prep. We always tag the team on those posts. Our social media assistant tagged everyone automatically, including Miles. The post went up at noon. By 2 p.m. we'd already had over 200 views, some from mutual acquaintances. I noticed the tag while scrolling and had it pulled immediately, but the views were already up. About a week later, Nadine called me. First time in months. She opened with a friendly tone, too friendly, and said she had seen something on Instagram and asked if Miles had been working with us. I told her he'd helped on a pitch a while back, but we hadn't brought him on beyond that. That wasn't a lie technically, he did help on one pitch early on. Just not only that, she said she was just curious, then dropped the subject. I warned Miles later that night. He listened, then just sighed. He said she probably already knew, but was waiting to see if either of us would admit it first. It had been 8 weeks since Miles officially joined the team, and by then, his presence had woven itself so seamlessly into our internal structure that even the most observant team members stopped referring to him as the new guy. He'd become integral, not just as a strategist but as a voice people waited for in meetings, a quiet anchor in brainstorms, someone whose opinion didn't just land well, it often settled arguments before they even began. He listened in a way that made people feel like what they were saying actually mattered, which, in a room full of fast-thinking creatives and Type A marketers, was a rare gift. Adrian, my co-founder, told me in passing that we should start thinking about offering him something long-term, maybe even a leadership title if he was open to it. I nodded without committing. Not because I wasn't sure, but because I had no idea what was happening on the other side of Miles's life, the side that still belonged to Nadine. I hadn't asked questions, hadn't pushed him for clarity, but I felt the ripples more with each passing week. He was quieter on our one-on-one calls, more introspective during team sessions, and once or twice, he canceled a morning sync last minute with vague messages like running behind or dealing with something. I didn't need details to understand. I could feel the weight. Then came the night of the client gala. Our luxury skincare brand was hosting a private reception to celebrate the official launch of the campaign, and we were invited as featured partners. It was an upscale event at a rooftop venue overlooking the skyline, elegant but not stuffy, the kind of place where you could sip champagne and still talk metrics without sounding like a sellout. Miles showed up right on time, in a tailored charcoal suit that somehow managed to look both intentional and effortless. When he greeted me at the door, his smile was polite but guarded, the kind of smile someone wears when they're splitting themselves in two. We made our rounds together, chatting with a founder, a few editors from a beauty magazine, and a couple of influencers we'd flown in from Europe. Everything felt smooth, professional, even easy, until we ended up on the terrace with 2 glasses of sparkling wine and no one else around. The city buzzed beneath us, and for a moment, we both just watched in silence. Then he said it, "She knows." I didn't ask who, I didn't need to. He went on to explain that Nadine had seen the Instagram reel, had replayed it, paused it on the whiteboard, and confronted him 2 days later. At first, she pretended it was curiosity, a casual question wrapped in faux support. "Are you working with Laurel now?" He admitted yes, said it was freelance, short-term, nothing dramatic. She didn't fight, didn't explode, just nodded and left the room. But ever since, things had shifted, dinners were colder, conversations clipped, and the silence between them had become its own language. He looked at me then, really looked, and said, "I didn't lie to her, but I didn't tell her the truth either. And now, I think she's waiting for me to choose a side." I wanted to say something meaningful, something wise or comforting, but all I could manage was, "You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that isn't real." He didn't respond, just touched the edge of his glass and nodded slowly. The rest of the night passed in a blur of toasts and conversations, but that moment stayed with me, a quiet fracture that couldn't be ignored anymore. A few days later, he sent a message asking to meet in person. We grabbed coffee at a small cafe near the office, one of those places with cement walls and pour-over options that made you feel like every sip came with existential clarity. He told me he was thinking of stepping back, maybe wrapping up the contract early. Said it wasn't about the work, that he'd never felt more engaged creatively, but that he couldn't keep existing in this limbo. I listened, trying not to react, trying to stay professional. But something in me clenched, not just because we'd lose a critical asset, but because, somehow, losing him felt personal. I asked if he was sure. He hesitated. "No," he said. "But I think it's what I'm supposed to do." That word, supposed, hit hard. As if duty still trumped desire, as if marriage still came with the expectation of sacrifice even when mutual respect had already eroded. We agreed he'd finish out the current project, hand off key accounts, and help us train a junior strategist we'd been onboarding. His exit was clean, respectful. He even left behind detailed frameworks and a proposal for a client segmentation tool we hadn't even thought to build yet. The day he logged off Slack for the last time, he sent me one final message: "No matter where I end up next, I'll always remember this as the first time I felt seen." I stared at it for a long time before typing back a single word: "Same." After he left, the energy at the firm shifted, not in a dramatic way, but noticeably. The team moved forward, as teams do, but his absence created a space no one could quite fill. I kept his segmentation notes pinned to my board as a reminder, not just of his insight, but of what it means to build something quietly powerful. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a branding summit, a keynote spot, no less. The event was hosted by one of the regional industry associations and streamed globally. The topic was narrative authenticity in modern campaigns, but I knew what I really wanted to say, that sometimes, the most disruptive thing you can do is believe in your own voice long before anyone else does. I stood in front of that packed room, lights hot on my face, and told the truth, not the polished version, not the sanitized talking points, but the reality of building something people dismissed for years. I didn't name Nadine. I didn't need to. But I spoke about being underestimated, about finding clarity in unlikely alliances, about the way a single partnership, born out of practicality, not rebellion, can open doors no validation ever could. Afterward, I walked offstage to applause and checked my phone. One new message from an unknown number. It was Nadine. "I watched your talk. I get it now. I'm sorry it took me so long." I didn't reply. Not out of spite, just out of peace. There was nothing left to prove. Miles had found his own path, our firm had found its rhythm again, and I had found something even more valuable than approval: silence, the kind that comes when you no longer need to defend the life you've built. The weeks after Miles left were strangely quiet, not just in the literal sense of fewer Slack pings or strategy memos, but in the way the energy of a place shifts when someone important steps away. Our team adjusted, of course. We always do. The nature of agency life is motion, People in, people out, projects morphing, energy moving forward whether you're ready or not. But something hung in the air that hadn't been there before. I started waking up earlier, reaching for my phone before my alarm, scrolling through emails like I was trying to fill a space that had no real name. The new junior strategist we onboarded was technically competent, sharp, articulate, full of industry jargon, but she lacked the nuance Miles brought, that ability to pull emotion out of a brand without turning it into a marketing cliché. We were still winning, still running on momentum, but it felt like coasting, not creating. Then came the award email. The campaign we submitted, the one Miles led strategy for, had been nominated for innovation in digital branding by one of the biggest marketing networks on the continent. I stared at the subject line for several seconds before opening it. The description of our campaign included phrases like strategic cohesion, narrative authenticity, and exceptional integration between creative and metrics. I could practically hear his voice in every word. The team celebrated, of course, champagne in the conference room, confetti emojis in our team chat, a congratulatory call from the client, but underneath all of it, I felt something else. Not regret, not longing exactly. More like the dull ache of an unresolved sentence. I didn't reach out to Miles. I figured he'd hear through the grapevine. Marketing is a small world when you work at a certain level, but I didn't expect what came next. A few days later, during a Thursday morning team sync, our social media assistant shared the performance data for a behind-the-scenes reel we had posted during the campaign shoot. It was just standard stuff, office footage, client meetings, a quick whiteboard clip from one of the planning days. She tagged all key team members automatically, including Miles. It wasn't intentional, just part of the workflow. But the algorithm did what algorithms do, pushed the post toward people connected to everyone tagged. I noticed the spike in views first, unusually high, especially from domestic traffic. I messaged her privately and told her to pull the tag, which she did immediately. But the damage, if you could call it that, was done. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. A message from Nadine. No emojis. No fluff. Just, hey. Saw something on Instagram. Is Miles working with your team? I sat with it for a while, fingers hovering over the screen, weighing every possible version of the truth. Eventually, I typed, he helped with a pitch a while back. Nothing long-term. Technically true. Not emotionally honest. She replied a few minutes later, got it. Just curious. That was it. But I knew that wasn't it. I didn't say anything to Miles. I figured if it escalated, he'd tell me. Or maybe not. That weekend, I stopped by the office briefly to prep for a Monday briefing and found our project manager Sal organizing samples from a client's shoot. She was humming to herself, but as I passed by, she said, almost absent-mindedly, I ran into Miles last week. On a call outside the building. He sounded intense. I paused. What do you mean? She shrugged, clearly not trying to start anything. He said something like, you don't have to understand it, Nadine. Just respect it. Then hung up. I nodded slowly and kept walking, but the phrase stuck to my skin. The next week was a blur of briefings and prep for the award showcase, and for a while, I managed to lose myself in the motion of it all. Then, on a Wednesday evening, as I was wrapping up an edit review, I opened my inbox and saw a forwarded message from Adrian. It was from the award committee. They wanted to highlight our campaign in a special segment, and they asked specifically for the strategist to join me on the panel discussion. Adrian wrote, should I say it was a team effort? Or do you want to see if Miles is willing? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sat there staring at the screen, feeling the weight of a decision I hadn't realized was still mine to make. That night, I drafted an email to Miles. Just a few lines. Told him about the nomination, the panel, the request. Asked if he'd be interested, no pressure. Didn't even sign off with anything personal, just let me know, Laurel. He replied the next morning. Thanks for thinking of me. I'd like to do it. Feels like the right kind of closure. The day of the panel, we met outside the venue. He looked calm, collected, the version of himself I remembered from that first strategy session, before things blurred. We walked in together like colleagues, and in that hour on stage, something remarkable happened. He spoke with clarity, not just about strategy, but about why brands resonate when their message isn't afraid to confront the uncomfortable. The audience loved it. People approached us afterward. One woman said, I've never seen strategy framed with that much empathy. And I realized, in real time, that this was the exact version of Miles Nadine had never seen. Or maybe had seen and dismissed. After the event, we grabbed a drink nearby, nothing fancy. He thanked me again, not for the opportunity, but for believing he could do this kind of work at all. I didn't say much. Just nodded and told him he had earned every bit of it. When we parted ways outside the bar, he hugged me. Brief, warm, unspoken. That night, as I walked into my apartment, I checked my phone and saw a notification. A private message request. From Nadine. I watched the panel, it read. You and Miles. You're good at what you do. I didn't know. I should have. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing it. I didn't reply. Some things don't need words. Some truths speak loudest in the silence that follows them. It had been nearly a month since the panel, and although neither of us spoke about it again, its ripple effects continued to move beneath the surface. The firm had picked up 2 new contracts, one in wellness retail and another with a boutique hotel group launching a sustainable luxury initiative in the Alps. Work was loud again, vibrant, focused. I was traveling more, mostly domestic for client launches and creative walkthroughs, and the team had started referring to that panel moment as a turning point, the event that made us feel like we were no longer proving ourselves to the industry but actively shaping it. Yet behind all that motion, there was a tension, small but steady, like a frequency only I could hear. It followed me through my days, not because of anything Miles had done recently. In fact, we'd only exchanged 2 short messages since the panel, but because I knew, in that deeply intuitive way you sometimes just know, that the next fracture wasn't going to happen on my schedule. It happened on a Wednesday. I had just finished a brand audit session with one of our creative leads and stepped into the front lobby to grab a delivery when I saw her, Nadine. Standing there like she belonged, wearing a blazer too sharp for coincidence, and holding her phone in that casual, over-it grip she always used when she wanted people to know she wasn't impressed. My stomach didn't drop, not exactly, but I did pause mid-step, letting the door close behind me just a beat too loud. "Hey," she said, as if she hadn't spent the past decade rolling her eyes at my job title. I was in the neighborhood? I didn't believe that for a second, but I motioned for her to follow me inside. We walked past the main bullpen, designers with headphones on, 2 interns arguing about layout ratios, someone on a video call pitching influencer tiers. Nadine glanced around, and for the first time, didn't say anything snide. She just looked. Really looked. I took her to one of the smaller glass meeting rooms and shut the door. "So," I said, leaning against the table, arms crossed. "Neighborhood walk, huh?" She gave a faint smirk, then shrugged. "I guess I wanted to see it for myself." I let the silence stretch between us. She broke it. "You built something impressive," she said, slowly, like each word cost her more than she expected. "I didn't think it was real. I mean, I didn't think you were faking, I just didn't think it mattered." I tilted my head, unsure whether to thank her or throw her out. "Why now?" I asked. "Why come here?" She looked away, then back. "Because every time Miles talks about his work, it's like he's someone else. Calmer. Clearer. Like he finally fits." My mouth went dry. I didn't respond. She kept going. "I used to think that meant he was drifting. That he was running from something. But now, I'm starting to think maybe he was just running towards something. And I didn't want to admit it." I watched her, trying to measure how much was truth and how much was guilt. Before I could say anything, the door opened. It was Adrian, holding a folder, and the second he saw Nadine, he froze. "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize," I waved it off. "All good, give me 5. He nodded and disappeared. Nadine stood, glanced at the office beyond the glass, then turned to me. "Is he coming back?" I blinked. "What?" "To the firm. You brought him in once. Are you going to again?" I hesitated. "I don't know. That depends on him. And on me." She nodded like she understood, but I wasn't sure she did. I thought maybe if I saw it, really saw it, I'd understand. And I do, a little. Still not sure I like it. Her honesty was so sharp I almost respected it. "Then I guess we're both getting what we need," I said. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For a second, I thought she might actually say something kind. Instead, she just said, "Take care," and left. I stood there alone for a few more minutes, watching the echo of her pass through the hallway like a ghost that had finally acknowledged the house wasn't hers. That evening, I found a note on my desk. No envelope. Just a folded page. It was from Miles. No greeting, no sign-off. Just, "There are conversations I avoided for years because I thought avoiding them was a form of keeping peace. Turns out, silence can be its own kind of violence. Whatever happens now, I'm grateful you never asked me to be smaller to keep things comfortable." I stared at it longer than I probably should have. Then I placed it in the drawer with the rest of our legacy documents, campaign blueprints, mood boards, and pitch concepts. Not because it was over, but because it finally felt real enough to archive. And some stories deserve to be filed, not erased. The office returned to its usual rhythm after Nadine's visit, but something in me didn't. I caught myself checking the lobby cameras more than once over the next week, half expecting her to reappear, half dreading it. But she didn't. And neither did Miles. His note remained untouched in my drawer, folded once, the crease now soft from how many times I'd opened it, stared at it, and put it back. Work, as always, didn't wait for emotional clarity. We were finalizing the pre-launch phase for the boutique hotel group's campaign, press kits, digital activations, influencer travel dates, and every hour felt like 20. One night, somewhere between edits and export approvals, I got a text from Adrian. "You still thinking about bringing Miles back for the next phase?" I read it twice before responding. "Only if he brings himself." There was no reply, just the quiet echo of a truth I didn't want to fully name yet. I missed him. Not in the romanticized way, not longing, not pining, just the way you miss someone who saw the same horizon you did. Who walked into your vision and sharpened it. A week later, I got an email. Subject line, update. It was from Miles. No fluff, just a short note explaining that he had taken on a consulting project with a brand accelerator out of Lisbon. He said he wasn't looking to stay long-term, just trying to gain clarity. He hoped the work was going well. I replied, "It's steady. It's good. We're prepping the next phase and your fingerprints are still all over the framework." He responded within minutes. "I see your firm mentioned in media now and it doesn't surprise me. That's how aligned it all felt. Like it was always supposed to be this way. I stared at the word supposed again, the same one he'd used when he stepped away, but now it felt different. Less like surrender, more like fate. I didn't ask about Nadine. He didn't offer. A few days later, I hosted a dinner with our core team to celebrate the launch of the first hotel series. Casual, rooftop bar again, candlelight and clinking glasses, the sound of earned exhaustion turning into laughter. Someone brought up Miles. Not directly. Just to remember when we pitched with that sustainability matrix? And everyone nodded like remembering a shared trip abroad. That's what he had become, a part of the firm's mythology now, not a ghost, not a mistake. Just a chapter. But as I rode home that night, I knew that chapter wasn't closed. And I was right. Because 3 mornings later, while I was reviewing a design draft, I got a call from my mom. Which, in itself, wasn't odd. She called to check in sometimes, usually with too many questions about my sleep schedule and not enough understanding of my job, but this time her tone was different. Flagged. Careful. Laurel, she said, I think something's going on with your sister. I straightened in my chair. What do you mean? She came by yesterday. Sat in the kitchen for 2 hours. Barely said a word. Your father tried to ask about work and she just shook her head. Then she started crying, and she wouldn't say why. I swallowed hard. Did she say anything about Miles? Only that she doesn't know what he wants anymore. The silence on the line stretched. Do you? My mother asked. I paused. I think he wants to be where he's allowed to grow. That's not always about love. Sometimes it's about space. She didn't reply, and I knew the call was over. The next day, Miles emailed again. Just a short note. Lisbon project wrapping early. We'll be in New York next week. Want to grab coffee? I agreed. We met at a corner cafe downtown, not far from the place we first discussed the idea of him joining the firm. This time, he looked different. Lighter. Not relieved, exactly, more like someone who had stopped pretending the path back was still an option. We talked for an hour. Not about Nadine. Not about the firm. Just about clarity, about momentum, about what it means to find purpose late, but not too late. I've moved out, he said near the end. We are being civil. No drama. But it was overdue. I didn't say I was sorry. He didn't ask for pity. Instead, we just sat there for a few minutes, letting the coffee cool. Do you want to come back? I asked, finally. Not as a favor. Not because we need you. But because you belong there. He smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached his eyes. Yes. I do. We didn't set a date. We didn't draft a new contract that afternoon. But the decision had been made, wordless and whole. That evening, I opened a private Slack channel named Return Strategy. I didn't invite anyone yet. Just let it sit there, a placeholder. Not for a comeback. For a continuation. Something already in motion. A few nights later, I got a message. Not from Miles. From Nadine. I know it's over, she wrote. And I know I didn't respect what you built. I didn't respect what he wanted. But you did. And somehow, I think that's what saved him. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I just closed the message, walked into our campaign room, and pinned a new set of creative briefs to the wall. We were building again. And this time, there were no ghosts. Only architects. 3 months later, I stood on the rooftop of our new London satellite office, watching the city stretch out beneath a dusk sky the color of brushed slate, the kind of soft gray that felt more like quiet than gloom. The team buzzed around inside, prepping last-minute drinks, coordinating AV tech, adjusting lighting for press photos. The launch event was modest but intentional, our way of signaling that we weren't just expanding geographically, but philosophically. The move into Europe had started quietly, a whisper of interest from 2 legacy fashion clients turned into an exploratory pitch, then into a contract, then into a legal entity. The final piece had been finding the right strategic lead to anchor our London work. When the time came, there was no audition. No interviews. Just one email, sent to Lisbon, that read, "We are ready." You? Miles arrived in London 2 weeks after that. Not as a freelancer. Not as someone slipping in through the side door. But as a partner. Official, equity-bound, title-bearing. I made sure of it. His title wasn't inflated. Just accurate, Executive Strategy Director, EU Division. The way he stepped into that office, deliberate, present, easy, told me we'd made the right choice. And more importantly, he had to. He wasn't running anymore. Not from Nadine, not from failure, not from ambiguity. He was choosing. And that choice wasn't about me, it was about him finally becoming who he had always suspected he could be. As the event started filling in, clients, partners, press, I stood near the back of the room, letting the energy unfold around me. Miles was up front, chatting with a group from an Italian brand we'd just closed. Someone asked him how long he'd known me, and I caught his answer from across the room, long enough to trust her instincts more than my own sometimes. I smiled and stepped out onto the balcony. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I didn't need to open it to know who it was. Nadine. I saw the business and brand piece, it began, referring to the profile a trade magazine had just published on our firm's expansion and leadership team. They called you a pioneer in narrative branding. Said your campaigns have changed the tone of the industry. I've never said this before, but I mean it now. I'm proud of you. I stood there for a long moment, letting the words settle. There was no anger left in me. No fire. Just space. The kind of space that only appears after you stop trying to be understood by people who never ask the right questions in the first place. I replied with a single line, "Thank you. I wish you clarity and peace. Nothing more. Nothing less." Later that night, after the last champagne flute had been collected and the final guest had descended the stairs, I stood alone in the main office, barefoot, dress heels kicked under a bench, Miles's annotated pitch deck still sitting open on a nearby table. He walked in silently, leaned in the doorway, and smiled. "You realize what you've built here, right?" he said. I looked around. "I think I'm starting to." He walked over, picked up the deck, and closed it carefully. "There was a moment, months ago," he said, "when I thought I'd have to choose between being seen and being safe. I didn't realize until now safety was a lie." I didn't answer. I just sat beside him on the couch, shoulder to shoulder, no pretense, no expectation. We didn't talk about what came next. Didn't define it. Just shared a silence that didn't ache anymore. The kind of silence that follows completion. A few days later, I flew back to New York for a speaking engagement, a headline spot at an entrepreneurship summit aimed at women-led brands. The room was packed. Lights, cameras, a huge LED screen with my name stretched across it in clean sans serif. I stepped on stage and began. Not with a pitch. Not with a mantra. But with a confession. For a long time, I thought success would feel like volume, louder, more visible, more obvious. But it doesn't. Real success is quiet. It's the morning after a breakthrough, when you realize no one's questioning your legitimacy anymore. Not because you shouted louder, but because you just kept building. The audience was silent, still, and I could feel the tension ease out of my chest with every word. I finished the talk with a story, not about Miles, not about Nadine, but about what happens when you stop asking to be invited and start designing the room. When I stepped off stage, I saw a young woman waiting near the side stairs. She looked maybe 24, holding a notebook tight to her chest. "You made me feel like this could be real," she said. I smiled. "It already is." That night, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and looked through old folders, the early campaigns, the failed mock-ups, the Slack screenshots of team jokes and midnight ideas that had turned into revenue. I found the original strategy doc Miles had first edited when he joined under an alias. I reread his notes. The way he wrote things like, "Too passive, make the brand bolder here," or "Great structure, but where's the emotional pull?" I smiled. I hadn't needed his validation then. But I had needed his partnership. And he'd given it freely. In the end, the irony wasn't lost on me. Nadine had spent years dismissing what I built. But it was her own husband who helped prove it to the world. And while she mocked the surface, we were down in the architecture, laying foundation no criticism could shake. She had tried to define me by what I lacked, a real job, a traditional title, a clinical degree. But I had built something alive. Something permanent. Something that, when seen from the right angle, didn't just look like success, it felt like freedom.